Warning: this episode contains graphic details involving murder, sexual assault, violence, and drug abuse. Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to Northern Nightmares, your home for nightmarish stories throughout Canada and beyond, and I'm your host Andrew. Today we take a trip back to the hippie era of the 60s, where the music was revolutionary, the love was blissful, and the drugs took you out of this world. During this time, the power of love and peace was promoted, especially against the Vietnam War. People went to music festivals, listening to the likes of Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, and even the Grateful Dead while tripping out with psychedelic drugs. Marijuana was a fan's favorite, while others loved the effects of LSD while cruising around in their Volkswagen Beetles and vans. However, as the hippies were living it up, we also had the Black Panthers fighting their war against police brutality, racism, and a better world for black communities. While all this was happening, another party sprouted up, led by one individual who believed a war was coming. People would follow this groovy dude, thinking he was going to change the world for the better. Little did they know he had a darker motive. This is the insane tale of the infamous Charles Manson and the Manson family. November 12, 1944, Kathleen Maddox would give birth to a baby boy at the Cincinnati General Hospital. Kathleen wrote on his birth certificate, "No name Maddox," as his official name, but it wasn't until a little bit later she would name him Charles Miles Maddox. 15-year-old Kathleen came from a strict Christian family, and having a baby was her rebelling against her family. She was thought to be a lady of the night, as Charlie's father is unknown to this day. Theory suggested a man named Colonel Walker Henderson Scott Sr. was the father, but no evidence exists to prove this claim. Charlie states in his book, Manson in his own words, as told by Newell Emmons, that his mother wasn't a prostitute, but a flower child of the 30s. She was married to a man named William Eugene Manson before and after Charlie's birth, but this marriage would only last just shy of 3 years. Charlie always believed he was the cause of the divorce, and he would later change his surname to Manson to disassociate himself from his mother's surname. Even though he had a deep love for his mother, despite all things she put him through. Kathleen would often be known for going out on drinking sprees, and on one night she sold a toddler for a pitcher of beer to a childless waitress. When she was done with her drink, she left the bar, leaving her son alone. After this incident, he was sent to live with his aunt and uncle. His aunt was his mother's sister. Charlie was taken care by them for the next 5 years, as shortly after the bar night, Kathleen would be sent to jail for armed robbery. Charlie's uncle was known as a sadistic fellow, putting Charlie in a dress one time because he put up a fit about going to school. Seeing Charlie as a sissy, the dress incident would encourage bullies to toughen Charlie up. There was many incidents like this one being one of many reasons why Charlie grew up to be the man we will know later. When Kathleen was released from jail, he considered this the happiest day of his life. This was sometime around 1942. She scooped Charlie up and the two would move to Charleston, West Virginia. She continued her drinking habits but would teach Charlie how to pick pockets. For an 8-year-old, he was known to be pretty good with his skill. However, it wasn't too long that Kathleen would be arrested for grand larceny, but charges were later dropped and the two fled to Indianapolis to start fresh yet again. It's here that Kathleen met Lewis Woodson Cavender Jr. during an AA meeting, and the two later married. Like any child, Charlie started to develop his own reputation. He was starting to become a troubled child, usually getting caught with petty theft and truancy. By age 12, in 1947, Kathleen got tired of Charlie, and with a lack of foster homes at the time, he was sent to the Gilbert School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana. This was run by strict Catholic priests that issued punishments for even the smallest infractions, usually included beatings with a wooden paddle or leather strap. By Christmas, Charlie managed to escape and arrive at his relatives. It was shortly after this that his mother came by and took him back to school. 10 months later, he escaped and fled back to Indianapolis. Around this time, he committed his first documented offense by robbing a grocery store for some food. I will say, this poor boy had it rough. Mother didn't want him, had no idea how to survive, and crime was the only thing he knew. I can't imagine what it was like dealing with this such at a young age. During this time, Charlie did try to live an honest life. He landed a job delivering messages for Western Union, and at age 13 he was already paying rent for an apartment in Skid Row of Indianapolis. Supposedly he found a cigar box of over $100, which he managed to pay for his room and get some food. However, all he knew was theft, so it was only a matter of time before he got caught again, which, late 1949, he was caught again and a judge sent him to another boys' school in Boys Town, Nebraska. He only stayed here for 4 days when he fled with another boy named Blackie Nielsen, and the two stole a car and fled to Nielsen's uncle in Peoria, Illinois. Nielsen's uncle was a professional thief, and he decided to take the two boys as apprentices. Manson was a shitty thief, though. There was never a time when he didn't get caught, as 2 weeks later he was arrested for a raid on a store in Peoria. This was also linked to another 2 robberies, and this was the start of his incarcerated life. Manson was immediately sent to the Indiana Boys School in Plainfield, Indiana. This place would send him down a crazy path to which he would become what we know later in life. This school was allegedly known for serious beatings, most involved other students, and encouraged by staff. Allegedly, Manson was raped by a few boys, but this claim isn't proven to be true. Manson had fled this school at least 18 times and repeatedly beaten each time he was caught. Manson would eventually develop a self-defense tactic that would help him avoid future entanglements with other boys and staff. This he would call the insane technique. It would involve him screeching and waving his arms around erratically to convince foes that he was deranged and dangerous. In 1951, he would eventually manage to finally escape his imprisonment with 2 other boys. This crew would rob gas stations during their journey, trying to make it to California. However, he would be arrested yet again in Utah for driving across states with another stolen car. For this, he finally hit a federal offense. This would land him in DC's National Training School for Boys. Upon arrival, he was given an aptitude test, which it determined he was illiterate, but he had an IQ of 109. His caseworker also deemed him aggressively antisocial for someone of his age. But with everything he's gone through so far, can you really blame him? His psychologist recommended that he be transferred to the National Bridge Honor Camp at Minimum Security Institute in Virginia. This was actually not too far from his aunt, which she frequently visited him. When he was up for parole in the coming month of February 1952, his aunt offered to move him in with her and help him find work. However, before he even reached that time, he was caught raping another boy while having a knife against his throat. This incident would send him to federal reformatory in Petersburg, Virginia. He would commit another 8 more offenses. 3 of them would involve homosexual acts. He would be transferred yet again to a maximum security reformatory, this time in Chillicothe, Ohio, where he would remain until November 21st, 1955. Manson would be age 20 in 1954, and in May of this year he was released early for good behavior. Over a couple years he reflected on his life, hoping once released he could go straight and try to live some kind of normal life. He would move back to West Virginia to start his fresh start. Here he would meet Rosie Jean Willis, or Rosie for short. She was a hospital waitress, and the two would later marry in January 1955. The couple would venture out to California to start their life together. California was the hip place to go where you can make it big and make a name for yourself. By October of that year, Rosie was 3 months pregnant, and Manson was going to be a father. When the couple made it to the Golden State, however, it didn't come to no surprise that Manson was charged, as he had stolen a car and driven across states. This was unknown to Rosie. He was subject to a psychiatric evaluation and later given 5 years of probation. When a hearing was scheduled, he failed to show up for his LA court date. Somehow, he fled back to Indianapolis, but would later be arrested and sent back to LA. His probation would be revoked, and he would be sentenced to 3 years in prison at Terminal Island Prison. This was a minimum security prison in San Pedro, California, which also housed the famous Al Capone back in the day. Rosie would give birth to Charlie Manson Jr. on April 10, 1956, while Manson was incarcerated. She would often visit him with his mother, and the two would be living together in this time in LA. During March 1957, these visits would only be his mother, which she would inform him that Rosie moved out to live with another man. With this terrible news, Manson would eventually try to escape, only to fail and be given another 5 years of probation, and any future parole was denied. In September 1958, he was finally released, but given 5 years of parole. When he tried to see Rosie, she filed for divorce, and there's no record of any other future interaction. It's assumed he met Manson Jr. during this visit, but there's no evidence saying he had any involvement after his release. By November 1958, Manson tried his hand at pimping gig, starting with his first girl at the age of 16. Manson had another girl working for him, but her income came from her wealthy parents. It's thought that they were unaware of their daughter's work and their money going to Manson. He kept under the radar for a time until September 1958, where he would receive a 10-year suspended sentence and probation because he attempted to cash out a U.S. Treasury check. A young girl he was pimping named Leona Ray Stevens, or Candy, made a tearful plea to the court that her and Manson were deeply in love and that would marry each other if he was free from these charges. This would sway the court, but he was still given another 5-year probation. This was all thought to be a ruse, but he stayed under high observation. Manson, Candy, and another woman fled to New Mexico to continue his pimping ventures, when he eventually was held in question for violating the Mann Act. This was also called the White Slave Traffic Act. This law prohibits the foreign transport of individuals for prostitution. However, this was later dropped, and Manson suspected that the investigation wasn't over. He eventually disappeared and went missing from the authorities for some time, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. In April of 1960, an indictment for the Mann Act violation would return. He was later found in Laredo, Texas in June, and later sent back to LA. Because he violated his probation, the cash check charge returned, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Here he would try for a year to appeal his probation, but was unsuccessful. For this, he left LA County Jail and was sent to the U.S. Penitentiary at McNeil Island in Washington, and it is here that he would learn guitar lessons and the start of his music career. This next few parts is where things get exciting, and the start of when Manson becomes what we would be famously known for. Manson would learn to play the guitar from another inmate, the leader of the Barker Karpis gang, a man named Alvin Creepy Karpis. Manson apparently got really good with the guitar, so good that another inmate gave him contact info to a Universal studio agent named Phil Kaufman in Hollywood. This info wouldn't be useful till much later when he got released, but we'll get to that later on. In September 1961, the Mann Act charge was dropped, but the cash check would still be in effect as it was a federal offense, and during this time, his annual review noted he has a tremendous drive to call attention upon himself. In 1963, Candy, his prostitute, filed for divorce and was granted it immediately. It wasn't until 1966 that he would be transferred a second time to Terminal Island in LA for his early release. Before this, his mother actually moved to Washington to be closer for him working as a waitress. Also, fun fact, while incarcerated in Washington, he was also with another famous inmate, Danny Trejo, before he became an actor. The two actually spent several hypno sessions together. By the time of March 21st, 1967, Manson had spent half his life in prison. He was 32 at this point. Most of this was because he broke several federal laws, and interesting enough, he asked if he could stay in prison because he felt it was more of a home to him, but that was denied, and he was sent out to the world to become what we would know. Now we finally arrive to the height of the 60s, the summer of love, 1967. This would be the time that all the events and parties I described in the beginning of this episode would be happening. I will also say this next part is very complex and a lot happens in the span of a couple years. So try to stay with me, and I promise I won't make this too confusing. Manson would move to Berkeley, LA, after getting approved and transferred under the watchful eye of his probation officer, Roger Smith. Now, Smith worked at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Center, where Manson was frequently here. HAFMC founder David Smith received funding from the National Institute of Health and supposedly the CIA to study the effects of LSD. Here, this would be studied at the San Francisco branch, where Manson would partake in the studies. Manson loved the high from LSD. He became a frequent user, and so much he started down a philosophy path. It started when he found the book Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. The synopsis for this: it follows a man named Valentine, raised by Martians and returned to Earth. He possessed a psychic power and lacked human knowledge, which he would lead him to become a messiah figure. The author challenges social, religion, and sexual norms, and this book would inspire Manson to become a messiah during this era. Manson would start preaching his own philosophy based on this book, the Bible, Scientology, and even Dale Carnegie. Now I know you're aware of the Holy Book, but let me explain the other two. My cold note is that Scientology is the belief that humans are immortal and alien beings known as the Theatans that are trapped in us. This was founded in the 50s by L. Ron Hubbard. Dale Carnegie was a pioneer in self-improvement and corporate training. He focused on interpersonal skills, on public speaking, and emotional well-being for professional success. Manson had another inspiration though, the groovy band of the time, the Beatles, but we'll come back to that later. Now he studied a lot of this during his time in prison, long before he got released. Now while hanging out in Berkeley, he became acquainted with his first major follower, Mary Brunner. Mary was a 23-year-old graduate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was a library assistant at the University of California in Berkeley. The two eventually fell in love and became quite the couple, and Manson eventually moved in with Mary. Manson would now meet another woman while at Venice Beach. He noticed her sitting on the bench, and after talking for some time, convinced her to move in with him and marry. This would be Lynette Fromm, later nicknamed Squeaky. She was a teenage runaway. Now it's said that Mary had little against having someone else move in. However, Manson was quite the charmer and a silver-tongued devil, managing to overcome this. Eventually, he would have up to 18 people living in Mary's home. This would be the start of his cult following and the famous Manson family. Manson had started to make himself known as a guru during this time and acquiring quite the rep amongst the local hippies. Before the end of the summer of '67, his family would move into an old school bus that was painted black, remove the seats, and the family would place colored rugs and pillows throughout the bus, making this one groovy home. They would eventually establish a few home locations throughout Topanga Canyon, Malibu, and even Venice. The most notable was Vaughn Ranch, an old Hollywood set used in media such as Bonanza, The Lone Ranger, and even Zorro. Now, near the end of the summer, Mary was pregnant and in April 1968 gave birth to their son, Valentine Manson, in an old condemned house in Topanga Canyon. She would have a few nicknames herself. Some notable are Mariochi, Mother Mary, and Mary Manson, to name a couple. Now, going back to David Smith, founder of HAFMC, in his book Love Needs Care, he claimed Manson attempted to reprogram his followers' minds with the help of LSD and sexual acts. This would make it easier for them to accept his will and make them empty vessels to accept whatever bullshit he fed them. Manson grew his family through drug use and prostitution. Going back to July 1967 for a moment, he was arrested for trying to prevent one of his major followers, Ruth Ann Morehouse, from being arrested. His charge would later be dropped and was given 3 more years of probation. Now, back to 1968, the Manson family bus crashed one day in a ditch and the police found the family naked and drugged out. But Manson was the one arrested again and then later released with a drug charge. Now, between April and July of this year, 2 of Manson's female members, Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey, were hitchhiking around town, with 2 times being picked up by a man named Dennis Wilson, one of the founding members of the Beach Boys. The girls would later tell Dennis about this guru they lived with. Now remember, Manson was interested as well in the music biz because he learned how to play guitar. One night, on his way home, Dennis met Manson in his driveway waiting for him. The 2 talked for a while, and in the next few days, the family would move into Dennis's home, and this would be the start of the Manson family music venture. Wilson was fascinated with Manson, calling him the Wizard in a Rave magazine article. The 2 struck up an unlikely friendship, and Wilson introduced Manson to many of his contacts. This arrangement would persist for 6 months, though. One of the major contacts was Terry Melcher, the producer for the band The Byrds. The Manson family recorded a lot of songs, but these recordings remained unheard of to the public. Now, around the summer of '68, the Beach Boys were becoming uneasy with the family's use of LSD, sex, and nudity. By August, Wilson got tired of the family and moved out of his own house, leaving it to the Manson family. By September, Manson records a song with the Beach Boys, originally titled Cease to Exist, but was retitled Never Learn Not to Love, a single that was a B-side and released in December. Now, Wilson took all the credit and never gave Manson credit that was due. And when Manson asked him about this, Wilson stated that Manson lost his rights to the song because of a few $100 worth of stuff that was stolen from his home before Wilson moved out. By late '68, Wilson cut all ties with the family. Manson hated this, so the family destroyed 2 of Wilson's cars and left his home with unpaid bills and damage to the property. Before leaving, Manson left a bullet with the housekeeper to deliver to Wilson as a haunting message for him, and the family moved back to Spa Ranch. Now, I want to briefly jump back to late 1967 one more time to introduce another important member of the family. During the end of this year, Charles Watson moved to LA. At some point between then and early 1968, he picked up a hitchhiker, which was Dennis Wilson, and he took him back to his home where the family had recently moved in. It is here that Watson joins the family and becomes a very important member. He would be later known as Tex Watson. Now back to 1968. When the family moved back to Spahn Ranch, the family did many chores around here, and on Manson's orders, some of the females had sex with the 80-year-old owner George Spahn, but Squeaky was the main member that took over this job. This communal family was approximately 100 followers by now, and a lot of them came and went throughout the early days, but the core crew remained wherever Manson went. It is here that now we explore the story when the family evolves into a doomsday cult. But before we get into that, you have to understand one more major piece of this puzzle. On November 22nd, 1968, the Beatles released their 9th studio album called The White Album. It was a dramatic shift from their psychedelic pop sound to a more rock and folk element. It was a 30-track double album with plain white cover. It had major hits like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Back in the USSR, Obla Di Obla Da, and the famous Helter Skelter. This album was number 1 on the UK charts and in December for 7 weeks, and was number 1 on the Billboard 200 in the US, remaining here for 9 weeks. It is this album that would be influential to Manson's beliefs. Manson believed prior to this album that a race war was coming against white and black people. Manson convinced the family that black people were going to rise up and kill off white people, except Manson and his followers. The ideology stems from his LSD-fueled brain, and with the Black Panthers War, Manson's paranoia grew. Manson told the family they weren't intelligent enough to survive on their own, and they needed his leadership to survive. He basically was making himself into a modern-day Jesus Christ, and his followers were reincarnations of the original Christians. While the White Album was released, Manson adopted the term Helter Skelter from the Beatles' hit song. Now, Helter Skelter's definition from the Oxford Dictionary states that it involves disorderly haste or confusion. Manson was obsessed with the White Album. He interpreted the whole album in ways no one else thought. He believed Helter Skelter was a direct call for black people to rise up against white people. The song Piggies would be a message that the establishment, or the piggies, would be violently attacked, basically saying white people were the piggies. The song Blackbird was a call for the Black Panthers to start the apocalypse. Rocky Raccoon somehow fit with racial narratives, and Sexy Susan was used as a nickname for another important member, Susan Atkins. Happiness is a Warm Gun was considered a vice for the revolution, and Manson to lead the charge. All this would spiral out of control for Manson in a matter of months. On March 23, 1969, Manson entered the grounds of 10050 CeeLo Drive, which was known to him as Terry Melcher's home, the producer for the band The Byrds. He was met by a man named Shara Hatami, an Iranian photographer that was friends with film director Roman Polanski, and his wife, Sharon Tate, who was living at the home. Hatami was there to photographed Tate before she left for Rome. Hatami asked why Manson was there and what he wanted, and Manson asked for Melcher. Hatami said that this was the Polanski's residence and no one by that name lived here, telling Manson to check the guest house. Manson eventually left. His purpose was trying to acquire money from Helter for his music he made. Later that night, Manson returned to the guest house, and when he got to the door, a man named Altobelli answered. He was the owner and told Manson Helter had moved to Malibu, and also stated that he didn't know his new address, in which he did, but wasn't going to disclose that to Manson. He also told Manson to leave the Polanskis alone and not to come back because they were leaving for a year. Now, Tex Watson got heavily involved in drug dealing. He ended up robbing a rival drug dealer, a black man named Bernard Lotzapapa Crow. When Crow called the ranch, he was demanding to speak to Charlie. Now, if you remember, Manson and Tex were both named Charlie. However, Manson was the one who answered the phone. Crow threatened him that he was going to kill everyone at the ranch, thinking he was talking to Tex. In response, Manson went to Crow's home, and the two got into a fight, and Manson ended up shooting him with a .22 bunt-line revolver. The shot wasn't fatal, but Crow was bleeding out. Manson fled back to Spa Ranch and tried to forget all about it. Now, Crow wasn't the type to go to the hospital, so he must have had some help from his crew to patch him up. However, by the next day on the news, Manson seen a report that a black man's body was found, and the news thinking that this was a member of the Black Panther Party. This only fueled Manson's paranoia, thinking the race war had begun. Crow wasn't a member, but to Manson, he didn't know this. Manson had turned Spawn Ranch into a defense fortress. Now, a little side fact, at some point, Tex consumed belladonna, a plant, to try to get high. Some accounts say that he found it, and others say that he was trying to make it a new LSD. Tex, having taken a huge dose, got super high. He was found days later all strung out and acting crazy. They say this really messed up his brain and would be later the reason for a future incident, which I'll get to soon. Belladonna is a famous plant that's extremely dangerous and can kill you if consumed. Now, prior to Manson shooting the drug dealer, he had established an alliance with the motorcycle gang, the Straight Satans. Manson hired them for security, but remember, Manson isn't rolling money, so he was getting desperate to find some cash, especially to pay this gang to protect Spawn Ranch because he had believed the race war had begun. Manson sent Susan Atkins, Mary, and another member, Bobby Boucheli, to visit a friend of the family, 34-year-old Gary Hinman, music teacher and graduate of USLA. Thinking Hinman was wealthy, he told his members to go get him to turn over any assets he had. The trio held Hinman hostage for 2 days in July 1969, but he denied having any money. Manson, angry with this, went to the residence with a sword and failed at intimidating him after he ended up slashing his face and ear. Now, Manson says he left the trio to finish the job, and he states he didn't order Bobby to stab him to death, but Bobby says otherwise, that he was ordered. It's not exactly clear which one is true. Manson also states he freaked out a bit because he didn't want any murder on his hands. After the trio left, one of the members wrote "Political Piggy" on the wall with Hinman's blood and drew a Black Panther paw, trying to frame the Panthers. Bobby was an idiot because days later he was found in Hinman's car asleep while a knife was in his hand, and the police had arrested him and he was convicted for the murder of Hinman. Now things are going to get really dark. On the night of August 8th, 1969, Tex took Atkins, Krenwinkel, and another member, Linda Caspian, to the Polanski residence under the order to totally destroy everyone. Manson denies never giving this order, that it was his followers' idea and led by Tex, since he's never been the same since the Belladonna incident. When his crew arrived, Sharon Tate, Jace Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Fowinski, and Stephen Parent were present. Tate and her crew only stayed in Rome for 4 months, but returned early because Tate was 8.5 months pregnant. Her husband Roman stayed in Rome a bit longer to finish the movie he was working on. Jay was a former lover to Tate and celebrity hairstylist. Folger was the heiress to the coffee company, and her boyfriend Wojciech was with her. Parent was a friend to the caretaker of the property, William Garrison. Watson climbed a telephone pole and cut the phone lines. They parked their car in the driveway, and Caspian stayed in the car as she was the driver and lookout. The crew then proceeded to climb over the bushes, thinking the front gate was electrified. They noticed a car pulling up and the crew hid. Tex approached the car and Parent was driving. Tex had the .22 revolver that shot Crow, the drug dealer by Manson, previously at Parent. Parent pleaded not to hurt him, but Tex slashed at his palms, cutting one, and then shot him 4 times in the chest. The crew then pushed the car up the driveway. The crew broke into the home where everyone else was in the living room. Tex started to tie Tate and Sebring together by the necks with nylon rope he had brought, and threw the rope over the ceiling beams to hang them both, but Sebring pleaded not to hurt Tate as she was pregnant. Tex then shot Sebring and then stabbed him 7 times. Folger was taken to another room to be assaulted, but she managed to give $70 to leave her alone. Wojciech was struggling against Atkins, and she managed to cut his legs, but he fled out the front door. Tex caught up to him, hitting him in the head with a gun and then stabbing him multiple times, and shot him twice. Folger managed to escape and fled out the back door, but Kirinkle caught up with her outside near the pool, and she managed to get out to the front lawn. Kirinkle stabbed her to death, and Tex helped her with the stabbing. She was stabbed 28 times. Wojciech was stabbed 51 times and hit in the head 13 times with the butt of the gun. This bent the barrel, and a piece of the hand grip was found at the scene. Tate begged for her life, offering herself up as hostage and let her give birth to her baby, but Tex and Atkins stabbed her 16 times in her pregnant belly. She was then hung from the ceiling, and the coroner report states that she died from a massive hemorrhage. Sebring was dead when they hung him as well. According to Tex, Manson had told him to leave a message, and they wrote "pigs" on the front door in Tate's blood. The next day, the 4 murderers, Manson and 2 other members, Linda Van Houten and Clem Grogan, went for a drive. Manson allegedly expressed distaste for the previous night's murders. They arrived at 3301 Waverly Drive in Los Feliz section of LA. This home was located next to another home where the family had attended a party a year before. The home that they arrived at belonged to a supermarket executive, Lino LaBlanca, and his wife Rosemary LaBlanca, co-owner of a dress shop. Manson disappeared up the driveway and allegedly broke in and tied up the couple. Tex, Houghton, and Krebwinkle entered the property next. In Tex's autobiography, he states that it was him and Manson that broke in first, finding Leno asleep, waking him up, and seeing himself at gunpoint. The crew then put pillowcases over the couple's heads and tied their hands up with lamp cords. Tex had stabbed Leno with a bayonet, and then a chrome-plated fork was used to carve "War" into his chest. He was stabbed 7 times. Rosemary was taken to the master bedroom and stabbed between 14 and 16 times. Krenwinkel wrote "Rise" and "Death to Pigs" in blood on the wall, and Helter Skelter as well. Leno was found with a fork sticking out of his stomach and a steak knife in his throat. 2 weeks later, Donald Shea Shorty, a stuntman that worked with George Spahn at the ranch, he was murdered by the family. Tex Grogan and Bruce Davis, another member, attacked Shea, bludgeoning him and stabbing him to death. Apparently, Manson had a grudge against him for having a previous marriage with a black woman. On August 12th, the LAPD raided the ranch for Manson on suspicion for auto theft, but because the LAPD was dumb and didn't have the right dates, he was later released. On October 12, 1969, Manson and his followers were arrested for charges involving Grand Theft Auto. They still had no idea about the murders. During this time, Atkins couldn't shut her mouth up and boasted about the murders to other inmates. Their first major break was on November 12th, when they were told by Manson he had knocked off 5 people. On December 8th, 1969, Manson, Atkins, Tex, Krenwinkel, and Caspian were charged with the Tate LeBlanc murders. In June 15th and 16th of 1970, the trial of the century had begun. Manson and his followers were charged with the Tate and LeBlanc murders. On June 25th, Manson was photographed with the famous photo of him sticking his tongue out during the trial. In August, Linda Caspian was granted full immunity because she was a lookout, and during the murders, and in her exchange, she testified against the crew. Also, Manson carved an X into his forehead, stating he X'd himself out of society. His crew did the same thing. This X in his forehead would later become the swastika he had famously always been seen with. Manson and his crew was sentenced to life in prison in 1971. And at some point in his incarceration, he got in contact with Phil Kaufman, and they arranged a deal to release the music that he had produced. You can find all that on Spotify and Apple Music under the band name The Manson Family. Manson had spent the rest of his life in prison until his death in 2017, when he died of natural causes. Now I want to say I know the trial and court story was very short, but I figured I'd coal notes it a bit. Everything with the trial and with each member is extremely long and even more complex than what I've already mentioned. With the other followers that didn't get caught, most just disappeared. Some kept trying to incite the race war for Manson. There's so much to this story that I felt this episode could go on for a couple hours. I myself am not knowledgeable in the legal world, and there's a lot of other media out there that do a way better job than me. I didn't want to make this story even more complex than it already is. If you want to check out more of this story, I know there's lots of Netflix documents and many books that go even deeper into the story. Maybe one day we will come back to this as sort of like a redux, let's call it, and focus on just the legal side, but that will be something for the future. Doing this episode was extremely fascinating, but it was also very difficult as I am by myself. However, I hope that you enjoyed the story, and next week won't be as long, as I think I'll do a fun, smaller story. I hope I did this story right, and I know I probably left some details out, but again, just want to tell the main facts. This whole story is like that Charlie Day gif from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he is at his conspiracy board and all the strings are going every which way. So next week I think we're going to return to the haunted objects world. It might be a little of a shorter story compared to this one, but I'll make sure it's fun and enjoyable as always. So, have a good night, sweet dreams, and remember, nightmares are always closer than you think.